6 months after he signed his divorce papers, 6 months after he walked out of his marriage, convinced he was doing the mature thing. He was sitting at a red light in central London when he saw her, his ex-wife, crossing the street in front of his car, heavily pregnant, with the child he demanded she abort. Tonight's confession comes from a man who thought he knew what responsibility looked like, until one ordinary traffic light forced him to see what he'd actually done. In his own words, he told us, "I divorced my wife because she refused to have an abortion. 6 months later, I saw her waddle past my car, 8 months pregnant, and realized I'd abandoned the only family I had." If you're new here, welcome to the Confession Stories. Real people, real decisions, and the moments that change everything. Before we dive into Ethan's story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if you've ever watched someone run from responsibility, only to discover the truth when it's far too late. This one might hit closer than you think. Now let's hear from Ethan.
My name is Ethan Ward. I'm 38 years old. I live in London, and for most of my adult life, I honestly believed I was a responsible man. I paid my bills on time. I worked hard, dressed well, hit my targets, climbed the ladder in commercial property. I was the guy people came to when they needed a decision made quickly. For years, I thought that was what being a good man meant. And then I married someone who showed me what real responsibility looked like. And I walked away from her the moment she needed me most. I met Hannah 7 years ago at a friend's engagement party in Shoreditch. Everyone else was loud and half drunk before dessert, but she was tucked in a corner near the fairy lights, sipping white wine and listening like the person in front of her was the only one in the room. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't the kind of woman who made you turn your head across a bar. She was steady, warm. An English teacher at a secondary school in Camden, the kind of person who remembered your birthday without Facebook reminders and sent handwritten cards instead of quick emojis. We started dating a week later. I took her to a rooftop bar overlooking the Thames, and she turned up in a simple navy dress and trainers, apologizing for being too practical because she'd been on her feet all day. I remember thinking, I could build a life with someone like this. For the first 4 years of our marriage, it looked like I was right. We rented a flat in Islington, then bought a small terraced house on a quiet street that had more prams than sports cars. We did Sunday markets, cheap flights to Europe, rainy walks in Hampstead Heath. We talked about children the way you talk about someday things. Someday we'll redo the kitchen. Someday we'll take that US road trip. Someday we'll have 2 kids, maybe 3 if we're mad enough. Someday always sounded safe to me. It meant distant, controllable, not now. I work in commercial real estate, office spaces, retail blocks, big deals that look good in the business section. The money's good, but the culture is dawkish, intense. Late nights, client dinners in the city, networking drinks that never really end when they should. At first, I told myself it was for us. Every extra hour was another step towards security. Every late night email was an investment in our future. Hannah believed me. She'd wait up sometimes, marking papers on the sofa until I stumbled in at 10:30 smelling like steak and Malbec. She'd kiss my cheek and say, "Long day?" And I'd say, "All for us," and actually believe it. Things started to shift around the time I turned 35. My firm landed a massive redevelopment project near King's Cross, the kind of thing that could put my name on a partner's door. Suddenly, my life shrank down to emails, spreadsheets, and train lines on a map. That's when Hannah stopped talking about someday and started talking about soon. One night she made shepherd's pie, the proper kind that takes hours and leaves the whole house smelling like comfort and childhood. We sat at the table, candles lit, and she said very calmly, "Ethan, I think it's time we start trying for a baby." I remember my fork freezing halfway to my mouth. I didn't say, No, I don't want kids, because I wasn't brave or honest enough to say that. Instead, I said what sounded reasonable. We should probably wait until the King's Cross project settles. We should save a bit more. Let's just get through this quarter. I used practicality like a shield. It made me sound mature, responsible. Hannah nodded, because she is, above all, reasonable. She said, "Okay, but soon, yeah?" And I said, "Soon, I promise." Soon came and went. The project dragged on. I said we should wait for the next bonus, then the next promotion, then, after the market settles, as if the entire UK economy had to calm down before I could tolerate the idea of a pram in our hallway. Our argument started small, little sighs when I checked my phone at dinner. Tight smiles when I canceled plans with her friends because a client had asked for last-minute drinks. Then one night, when I stumbled in just after midnight, tie loose, head buzzing with expensive whiskey and empty praise, I found her sitting on the stairs in her pajamas, eyes red, mascara smudged from crying she'd tried to wipe away. "Do you actually want children, Ethan?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I could have told her the truth in that moment. I could have said, "I'm scared. I feel like I've only just gotten control of my life, and I'm terrified a baby will rip it out of my hands." Instead, I heard myself say, "Of course I do, just not yet. Not when everything's this chaotic." She looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to decide whether she believed me or if she was just tired of holding this conversation together on her own. "I'm 32, Ethan," she said softly. "We've been talking about someday for 7 years. I don't have unlimited some days left. It all might have been salvageable if the pregnancy hadn't arrived when it did." It was a Tuesday when she told me. I came home with a headache shaped like a spreadsheet. Hannah was at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her school lanyard was still around her neck, her marking untouched in a neat pile beside her. "I'm pregnant," she said. 2 words. That's all it took. I wish I could tell you my first feeling was joy, or even shock. What I actually felt was panic, sharp and cold, slicing through me like a knife. "How far?" I heard myself ask, like we were talking about a delayed train, not a human life. "About 6 weeks, they think," she said. "I took 3 tests, and I went to the GP." She was already touching her stomach without realizing it, fingers resting there protectively as if her body had accepted something my mind was trying to reject. She smiled, nervous and hopeful. "I know the timing isn't perfect, but Ethan, this is what we said we wanted. Maybe this is our soon." I should have matched her hope. I should have said, "We'll figure it out. People far less prepared than us have raised children and done just fine." Instead, I went straight to numbers and logistics, budgets, calendars, flights I'd booked for work, the King's Cross deadlines, everything except the fact that there was a baby growing inside my wife. "We're not ready," I said, "financially, emotionally. Hannah, we've barely been on the same page for months." Her smile faded. "We have a mortgage," I continued, as if she wasn't painfully aware of that. "My firm's expecting me to travel for at least the next 6 months. We haven't even fixed the leaking roof. How are we supposed to bring a child into this?" She stared at me, tears filling her eyes. "This isn't about the roof, Ethan," she whispered. "This is our child." I couldn't hear that word without my chest tightening. Child, father. They were suddenly heavy, like chains being slipped over my shoulders. "I just think," I said slowly, carefully, "that we need to be realistic. There are options, Hannah. We can reset, plan properly, make sure that when we do this, we do it right." It took her a moment to realize what I was suggesting, and when she did, she recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "You're talking about an abortion," she said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed. The word sounded harsh in our nice, renovated kitchen, like it belonged in a different kind of life. "I'm talking about being responsible," I said. "We're barely holding ourselves together right now. Bringing a baby into that, it's not fair, Not on us, not in them. Full. Hannah wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand. I have wanted to be a mother my entire life, she said quietly. I have held other people's children in my arms and thought, one day it will be my turn. And now it is, and the first thing you want to talk about is getting rid of it? The conversation didn't end that night. Instead, we circled it for weeks. I kept calling an abortion the practical option. I said things like, "Wife, we can try again later," as if lives were appointments you could reschedule. Hannah kept saying the same sentence again and again. I'm not terminating this pregnancy, Ethan. Every time she said it, I felt more cornered, more trapped. In my head, I framed it as her making a unilateral decision that would affect us both forever. I called her stubborn, emotional, irrational. I didn't call myself what I really was. Coward. The night everything broke, it was raining, the kind of steady London drizzle that makes the streetlights look blurred and tired. We were in the living room. She was in one of my old university hoodies, curled around the small bump that was just beginning to show. We'd been arguing for an hour, going in miserable circles, both of us saying things we'd already said 10 times before. Finally, I snapped. I can't do this, Hannah. I said, I can't be a father right now. I don't want this. She stared at me like I just ripped the floor out from under her. You don't want our child, she whispered. I don't want a child at all, I shot back. Not like this, not now, not when everything is falling apart. There was a long, terrible silence. Then I said the words that changed everything. If you keep this baby, I want a divorce. Even now, saying it out loud makes my throat close. Hannah's face crumpled, but she didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just started to cry in this quiet, shaking way that made me feel like a monster and a stranger in my own home. You're asking me to choose between my child and my husband, she said, and you think that makes you the reasonable one? I told myself I was giving her a choice, that I was being clear, honest, rational. I told myself that if she really loved me, she would see sense. She looked at me for a long time, like she was memorizing my face for a version of her life where I no longer existed. Then she wiped her tears and said, I won't kill my child to keep you. If those are my options, Ethan, then you should leave. I moved out 3 days later. It took one phone call to an estate agent friend to find a furnished flat in Canary Wharf. Glass, steel, clean lines, a place where nothing had any history with us. I told my colleagues that Hannah and I had different timelines when it came to children, that we decided to separate before resentment built up. It sounded mature, civilized. I did not tell them that I'd given my pregnant wife an ultimatum and walked away when she refused to end the pregnancy. Our divorce moved quickly, too quickly in retrospect. Hannah didn't fight me on anything. She didn't ask for more money than she was entitled to. She didn't demand the house or come after my investments or send angry late-night texts. She just signed. She took her half of the savings, her clothes, her books, the plant collection she'd nurtured on our windowsills, and let me keep everything else. The solicitor even commented on how amicable it all seemed. I remember nodding, feeling sick. In my mind, I wrote a story that made sense to me. I told myself that once the reality of single pregnancy sunk in, the appointments, the costs, the logistics, Hannah would change her mind. I pictured her sitting alone in our kitchen, looking at the calendar, doing the maths, realizing this was all too much on her own. In that version of the story, she would call me, voice shaking, and say, "You were right. Can we try again later?" It was a fantasy I clung to because the alternative was acknowledging what I'd actually just done. The silence should have told me something. Weeks went by, then months. No texts, no emails, no demands for child support, no legal letters about custody. I took that silence as evidence, I decided it meant she'd ended the pregnancy. I didn't check, I didn't ask, I didn't have the courage to hear anything else. Instead, I threw myself into work. Late nights became my default. Client dinners turned into post-dinner drinks, which turned into staying out just long enough to avoid walking into my empty flat sober. My friends, the ones who measure success in bonuses and square footage, told me I looked better than I had in years. "Single life suits you, mate," they'd say, clapping me on the back. I nodded and smiled, carefully not thinking about the woman who used to wait up for me with a mug of mint tea and questions about my day. By late summer, the divorce was finalized. 6 months had passed since Hannah told me she was pregnant. I had built an entire reality on a single assumption that somewhere along the way, quietly, she had done what I wanted. Then came the red light. It was a Friday morning in late August. The sky was that dull, washed-out blue London does so well. Not quite sunny, not quite gray. I was driving through Holborn on my way to a breakfast meeting thinking about rental yields and vacancy rates when the light ahead flicked to red. I slowed, stopped, reached for my coffee and the cup holder. The pedestrian signal changed. People started crossing in front of me. Students with headphones, a woman in a navy suit running in heels, a man walking a golden retriever that refused to hurry. And then I saw her. At first, my brain refused to process it. Hannah. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, wisps escaping around her face the way they always did when she'd rushed out of the house. She was wearing a loose, pale blue dress and trainers. She looked tired, older somehow. But still, Hannah. And she was pregnant. Not 6 weeks, not 3 months. Heavily, undeniably pregnant, 7, maybe 8 months along. Her hands rested on the arc of her belly as she crossed, one palm absent-mindedly stroking the fabric like she was soothing the child inside without thinking. My heart stopped. It was like someone had pressed pause on the world but forgotten to tell my body. My hands went numb on the steering wheel. My vision tunneled until all I could see was the curve of her stomach under that blue dress. The horn blared behind me. I barely heard it. I did the maths in my head with the sick precision of someone checking an exam answer they already know is wrong. 6 weeks in January, 6 months since, 8 months pregnant now. There was no gap, no window for trying again later. This was the same pregnancy, the same baby, my baby. The light turned green. I didn't move. Hannah reached the other side of the road, checked for traffic, and kept walking, completely unaware that her ex-husband was sitting 10 meters away, watching the entire world he'd built for himself collapse. More horns. Someone shouted something out of a van window. I finally jerked my foot onto the accelerator and lurched forward on autopilot. I don't remember the rest of the drive. I don't remember calling my client to cancel the meeting. I don't remember parking my car on a side street with double yellows and not caring at all. I remember sitting there, hands shaking on my lap and understanding, really understanding what I'd done. Hannah had never had an abortion. She had carried our child, my child, for 8 months on her own while I was out drinking with colleagues and telling myself the problem had gone away. Every justification I'd used crumbled in seconds. I hadn't stepped back to let us figure things out. I'd abandoned my pregnant wife. I hadn't given her space to decide. I'd refused to even ask what she was going to do because I didn't want to know if the answer didn't match the story in my head. I sat in that illegally parked car for over an hour, phone in my hand, her name on the screen, thumb hovering over the call button. I didn't press it. I told myself I didn't know what to say, that it was too late, that she'd built a life without me and I had no right to crash back into it. The truth was simpler. I was a coward again. For the next week, I moved through my life like a ghost. I missed meetings, I ignored emails, I stared at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred and still had no idea what they said. My friends noticed. They kept asking if I was okay. I said I was just tired. London, work, you know how it is. I didn't tell them that every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah's hand on her stomach as she crossed that road. I drove past our old house 3 times before I had the courage to stop. The curtains were different. There was a new plant in the front window. Her car was in the same spot it had always been. I didn't knock. I just sat in my car, watching the front door like it might open and reveal some version of my life where I hadn't completely ruined everything. Eventually, I did the next cowardly thing. I called her younger sister, Lucy. When she answered the phone and heard my voice, there was a pause. Then her tone went flat. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked. I saw Hannah," I stammered. "Last week in Holborn. I couldn't say it, couldn't force the word pregnant past my throat. 8 months along, Lucy said coolly. Yes, somehow she managed to grow a whole human being without your input. I deserved that, every edge in her voice, every ounce of contempt. How is she? I asked, hating how small I sounded. Lucy sighed. She's managing. She's tired. She's been working as long as she safely can. She's done every scan, every appointment, every class on her own. Well, not entirely alone. She's got us. Does she hate me? I asked. There was a long pause on the line. She doesn't talk about you much, Shewis, Lucy said finally. When she does, she doesn't use that word. She says you made your choice, and she's making hers. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was devastated. Does her family know why we divorced? I asked quietly. Not from her, Lucy said. She just told Mom and Dad that you wanted different things, that you grew apart. She never told them about the ultimatum. She never told them you walked out because she refused an abortion. I leaned against the wall, dizzy. Why? I whispered. Because she said, Lucy replied, that she didn't want your child growing up knowing their father had to be shamed into showing up. That was the moment something cracked open in me. Hannah could have told everyone what I'd done. She could have painted me accurately as a selfish man who picked his career and comfort over his wife and unborn child. Instead, she protected my reputation, even as she carried the consequences alone. I hung up with Lucy and sat on the floor of my immaculate, empty flat, surrounded by sleek furniture that suddenly looked obscene. A decent man would have called months ago. A decent man would have checked in even if he didn't know how to be a father. A decent man would not have built an entire fantasy on the hope that his wife had quietly fixed his problem for him in the most permanent way possible. I used to think I was decent. That day, I finally admitted I wasn't. 3 weeks after seeing Hannah in Holborn on a cool Saturday afternoon in mid-September, I drove to our old house and parked outside for the 4th time. This time, I got out of the car. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I walked up the path we used to sweep together on Sunday mornings. I could hear a TV on faintly inside. Some daytime quiz show Hannah used to half-watch while marking. I knocked. My hand was shaking so badly I had to put it in my pocket afterwards to stop it from betraying me. When the door opened, she stood there, one hand on the frame, the other resting on her very pregnant belly. She looked different, soft around the edges, tired in a way that went deeper than sleep, but also, somehow, stronger. Hannah, I said. Her face went through 3 expressions in the space of a heartbeat, shock, anger, something like sorrow, before settling into a careful, guarded neutrality. Ethan, she replied, what are you doing here? For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the speeches I'd rehearsed in my car dissolved, leaving me with nothing but the one truth I should have said months before. "I'm sorry," I said. "I am so, so sorry." The words tumbled out of me then, ugly, clumsy, desperate. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I gave you that ultimatum. I'm sorry I made you go through this on your own. I told myself that you'd chosen differently. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. And then I saw you in Holborn and..." My voice broke. I pressed my hand over my mouth like I could hold myself together physically if I tried hard enough. Hannah didn't interrupt. She watched me, expression unreadable, while tears slid down my face and dripped onto the welcome mat she'd picked out from a charity shop. When I finally ran out of sentences, there was a long silence. "I appreciate the apology," she said at last, "but it doesn't change the last 6 months, Ethan." She leaned more heavily against the door frame, one hand absently rubbing her back. "I have gone to every appointment alone. I have sat in waiting rooms full of couples feeling like I failed some invisible test. I've woken up at 3 a.m. with cramps so bad I thought something was wrong and had no one there to say, 'It's okay, let's call someone, we'll figure it out.'" Her voice didn't rise. She didn't shout. That almost made it worse. "I felt our baby kick for the first time in bed by myself," she continued. "I cried, not just because it was beautiful, but because there was no one next to me to share it. No one to grab and say, 'Did you feel that? That's our child.'" She looked up at me then, eyes bright, jaw set. "You chose not to be here for any of that," she said. "That was your choice. So what are you actually asking me for now?" The honest answer was forgiveness, redemption, some way to rewind time I knew didn't exist. What I said was, I want to be involved, if you'll let me. I know I don't deserve to ask that, but I'm asking anyway. I want to meet them. I want to be their father." Hannah let out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in her chest for months. "I'm not going to slam the door in your face and tell you never to come back," she said slowly. "But I'm also not letting you walk in here and pretend the last 6 months didn't happen." She glanced down at her belly. "When this baby is born, their life cannot revolve around whether you're currently in a phase where fatherhood feels convenient or not. If you want to be involved, you don't get to be part-time." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll do anything," I said. "I'll prove it. I know words mean nothing right now. I know I've already failed them, but please, give me a chance to fail better. Or at least try not to." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth at that. The old wry Hannah peeking through for half a second. "Your first test," she said, "is Tuesday at 11. My next scan at the hospital in Bloomsbury. You can come if you want. If you don't show up, I'll know this is about easing your guilt, not about this baby." She stepped back then, as if standing for so long had exhausted her. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said quietly. Then she closed the door. I arrived 45 minutes early. Sitting in the maternity waiting area was like being dropped into a parallel universe. Couples everywhere, women with swollen ankles and men balancing hospital bags, trying to look braver than they felt. The air smelled like hand sanitizer and vending machine coffee. I sat on a plastic chair, hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached, and watched partners talk quietly, their heads bent together over grainy printouts of scans. This should have been me months ago, holding Hannah's hand, Googling things I didn't understand and pretending I wasn't terrified. At 10:57, Hannah walked in. She looked surprised to see me there so early. "You came," she said. "I said I would," I replied. It sounded weak even to my own ears. We checked in at the desk, sat in silence until her name was called. In the dim light of the scan room, the sonographer squeezed cold gel onto her stomach and moved the probe across her skin. The monitor flickered to life. There, in grainy black and white, was a profile, a spine, tiny fists. Then the sound came. A fast, steady thump, thump, thump filled the room. "That's your baby's heartbeat," the sonographer said, smiling. "Strong and regular. Everything looks good." I had heard thousands of sounds in my life. Traffic, trains, applause, my own name over a PA system, but nothing like that. Something inside me cracked wide open. This wasn't a concept, not a problem to solve or a line in a budget. This was a person, my child. A girl, the sonographer added, if you wanted to know. A daughter. I had told Hannah I didn't want her. I had demanded she be erased before I even knew she existed. I felt sick and awake and more present than I had in months. After the appointment, Hannah tucked the printouts into her bag. We walked out of the hospital together, an awkward distance between us. "You can come to the next one," she said finally, "and the one after that, if you keep showing up." "I will," I said. "I promise." For once in my life, I kept a promise that didn't benefit me first. I went to every appointment, every class, every awkward tour of the labor ward where midwives explained things I wished I'd heard months earlier. I didn't push into Hannah's life beyond what she invited. I didn't ask to stay for tea or to talk things through. I just showed up where she said I could. I rearranged my work schedule, turned down trips, started leaving the office at 6 instead of treating my flat like a hotel with worse room service. My colleagues joked that I was going soft. Maybe I was. But for the first time since my 20s, soft didn't feel like an insult. Our daughter, because by then I could think the word without flinching, arrived on a cold, rainy morning in early October. Hannah's sister called me at 2 a.m. "She's in labor," Lucy said. "If you want to be at the hospital, you should come now." I was dressed and out the door in 5 minutes. I drove through wet, empty streets with my heart beating louder than the wipers. At the hospital, Hannah chose Lucy to be with her in the delivery room. That hurt. I won't lie, but I didn't argue. I hadn't earned the right to be there for the hardest part just because I'd shown up at the end. So I sat in the waiting area, pacing, checking my phone, praying in a way I hadn't since I was a child. 14 hours. That's how long it took. 14 hours of coffee, of whispered questions at the nurse's station, of imagining every worst-case scenario. When Lucy finally appeared, her hair was a mess, and there were tear tracks on her cheeks. "She's here," she said. "A little girl, she's okay. Hannah's okay. They're both exhausted, but they're okay." I sat down heavily, every muscle in my body giving up at once. I realized I'd been holding my breath for 9 months. "I'm going to tell Hannah you're here," Lucy added. "She said you can meet her tomorrow morning. She needs to sleep now." Tomorrow, another night, another tiny consequence of 1,000 bigger choices. I went home to my flat and didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa as dawn crept in, thinking about all the moments I'd already missed. The first flutter of movement, the late night talks to a growing bump, the way Hannah's face might have looked when she heard that heartbeat for the first time months ago without me. The next morning, I bought flowers Hannah would actually like. Nothing flashy, just white tulips. And a small stuffed elephant that looked sturdier than most of the pastel animals in the shop. At the hospital, a midwife led me to Hannah's room. She was propped up against pillows, hair pulled back, face pale and puffy with exhaustion. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was the smallest person I had ever seen. Hannah looked up when I walked in. For the first time in a long time, her expression wasn't angry or closed off, just tired, and something else I couldn't name. "Hi," I said softly. "These are for you." I set the flowers down, suddenly aware of how ridiculous they were compared to what she'd just done. "This is her," Hannah said quietly, "our daughter." She shifted the blanket so I could see. Tiny nose, dark hair, eyes squeezed shut, mouth forming a perfect little O with each sleeping breath. Something in my chest exploded and reassembled itself in a completely different shape. "Do you want to hold her?" Hannah asked. I could barely speak. I just nodded. She placed our daughter in my arms with the care of someone handing over the most fragile thing they own. The weight of her, barely anything really, might as well have been an entire universe. "Emma Grace Ward," Hannah said. "That's what I put on the certificate. You can argue about the middle name later, but that's who she is now." Emma. I looked down at her, at the tiny human who would never know how close I'd come to making sure she didn't exist at all, and my vision blurred. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, not to Hannah this time, to Emma. "I didn't want you. I told your mom you were a problem to solve, and I was wrong about everything. I can't change that. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to be someone you deserve to have as a father." She didn't understand, of course. She just slept, one tiny hand curled into a fist against my chest. But I understood. For the first time in months, I understood exactly who I wanted to be. Hannah watched us, eyes shining. "I was so angry at you," she said quietly. "For a long time, that anger was the only thing that got me out of bed some mornings, but I don't want Emma to grow up in a house full of hate or bitterness. She deserves better than that." She swallowed. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I don't think we're there. But for her sake, I'm willing to let you try, to be here, to be her dad." I nodded. The words, "thank you," far too small, but all I had. The months after Emma's birth reshaped my life more than any promotion, any deal, any bonus ever could. I learned how to change nappies without getting covered, how to make bottles at 3 a.m, how to rock a screaming infant until my arms shook and my back ached and I would still keep going because she needed it. I set up a standing order for child support and then increased it without being asked. For the first time, money wasn't about status. It was about nappies, formula, heating, tiny socks that vanished in the wash. I started saying no at work. No to late night drinks. No to just one more meeting. No to trips I didn't absolutely have to take. My colleagues were confused. Some drifted away. Others adjusted. "Ward's gone domesticated," they joked. They weren't entirely wrong. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I showed up 3 times a week at Hannah's house. Sometimes to take Emma out in the pram along the same streets. I used to rush down with my phone glued to my ear, sometimes just to help. Wash bottles, fold tiny clothes, give Hannah 20 minutes to shower in peace. Hannah never made it easy. She didn't suddenly start inviting me in for dinner or laughing at my jokes. But she didn't shut me out either. She watched. She waited. She measured my apologies against my actions over weeks, then months, then years. When Emma turned 1, we had a small party at a park. Just family, a few close friends. I hired a gazebo because the forecast said rain. Classic London. I stood there, paper plate in my hand, watching my daughter smear icing on her face, and realized there were people from both sides of our lives standing in the same space for the first time since the divorce. I could have let the day pass quietly, smiled for photos, gone home and called it progress. Instead, I asked for everyone's attention. My hands shook as I cleared my throat. "I want to say something," I said, "about Emma, about us." I told the truth. I told them I had walked out when Hannah was pregnant, that I'd asked her to have an abortion, that when she refused, I chose my own comfort over both of them. I said it as plainly as I could, not to ask for sympathy, but because I didn't want Emma growing up with a sanitized version of who I used to be. I told them that if they saw me being a good father now, it was not because I had always been one. It was because someone stronger than me had refused to let me erase my child for convenience, and then, somehow, had still allowed me back into her life. There were tears, awkward hugs, a few hard looks that I deserved. Hannah didn't say much that day, but later, after everyone left, we stood in her tiny kitchen while Emma slept in her cot upstairs. "I'm proud of you," Hannah said quietly, "for the father you're trying to be now, not for what you were, but for who you're choosing to become." It was the closest thing to forgiveness I'd ever expected to get. We never got back together. Hannah started dating again a few years later, a kind man named Ian who works in IT and makes Emma laugh until she gets hiccups. The first time I saw him tuck her into her car seat, my stomach twisted. I wanted to hate him. But he was gentle with her, respectful with Hannah. He never once tried to sideline me as a father. So I did the hardest thing I've had to do since that red light. I stepped back from my ego and told myself this was a good thing. Emma had more people who loved her now. When she was old enough to ask why Mummy and Daddy didn't live together, I didn't lie. I told her in simple words that when she was very small, I was scared and made a wrong choice, that I had hurt her mum deeply, that I spent a long time making up for it. I told her that none of it was her fault, that she had always been wanted, even when I was too stupid and selfish to know it. She listened seriously, then asked if we could get ice cream. Children have a way of accepting things that would tear adults apart. Now, when I sit in school halls watching her in assemblies, or on cold sidelines at her football matches, or in the front row at her year 6 play, I never take it for granted. Every time I see her run towards me, I remember that morning at the red light, the version of my life where I kept driving and never knew what I'd lost. I can't fix the first 6 months I missed. I can't be there retrospectively for the scans I skipped or the nights I left Hannah to cope alone. All I can do is this: show up now, again and again and again, until showing up isn't redemption anymore, but simply who I am.
Ethan didn't cheat. He didn't hit anyone. He didn't scream or smash plates. He did something quieter, and in its own way, just as devastating. He hid from responsibility behind logic and timing until he almost erased his own daughter before she ever took a breath. Hannah chose differently. She chose to keep her child. She chose to walk through pregnancy alone rather than kill her baby to keep her husband. And years later, she chose something even harder than anger. She chose to let him try, not for his sake, but for Emma's. Ethan will never get those first 6 months back. He will always carry the knowledge that he demanded his daughter's life as the price for staying married. But he also changed, not overnight, not with one apology, with years of early mornings, school events, missed promotions, and messy, ordinary presents. So we want to ask you, if you were Hannah, could you have let someone back into your child's life after they abandoned you at your most vulnerable? And if you were Ethan, would you have had the courage to keep showing up, knowing you might never fully earn back what you lost? Tell us in the comments below if Ethan's confession hit a nerve, if you've seen someone run from responsibility, or if you've lived through a version of this yourself. We're listening. And if you're still here with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Confession Stories, and share this with someone who might need to sit with it for a while. Because sometimes the stories that make us the most uncomfortable are the ones that change us the most. We'll see you in the next story.